You are listening to KSG Podcast. This is a short, crisp, concise, exam-oriented, edited editorial for civil services aspirants. The topic for this podcast is Transition from Fossil Fuels. Source for the content is Sudipto Munle's article for Mint. Ironically, the coal crisis has forced the Indian government to ramp up domestic production and imports of coal, the dirtiest fossil fuel, while the world focuses on net zero carbon emissions by 2050. This irony reflects the reality that power generation and hence our economy is heavily dependent on coal, followed by petroleum. Power generation is the main source of carbon emissions. Estimates based on data from the International Renewable Energy Agency indicate that non-renewable fossil fuels account for 70% of the current generation capacity of 452,338 megawatts, followed by hydro or marine power at 11%, solar and wind power at 6% each, nuclear power at 5%, and bioenergy at 2%. The big question is, how do we move from such heavy dependence on fossil fuels to a net zero carbon emissions situations where the share of fossil fuels is virtually eliminated, and how long will it take us to get there? A recent Council for Energy, Environment and Water report has highlighted many formidable challenges to India's transformation from a fossil fuel dependent economy to one based on renewable energy. First, there is the technological, managerial, and regulatory capacity to manage this revolutionary transformation. Then there is the major constraint of finance. The transformation will involve massive high-cost, high-risk, long gestation investments. There is little fiscal space for large public investment in renewables, while private investment in renewables at scale is just starting. The willingness of developed countries, especially the US, to make available adequate low-cost finance and required technologies remains uncertain. India has negotiated hard to tie up access to such financing and technologies. The results are still awaited. Another major constraint is access to land. The CEEW, that is Council for Energy, Environment and Water, estimates that creating renewable power generation capacity for a net zero economy would require between 4% to 6% of India's landmass. Managing the political economy of the transformation is yet another challenge. Tapering off of fossil fuel-based power generation and closure of coal mines, oil wells and thermal or oil-based power plants will be resisted by the owners of these assets as well as thousands of workers employed at these establishments. If the cost of power based on renewables turns out to be higher than fossil fuel-based power, even consumers will resist the transformation. Breakthrough technologies in carbon capture and storage and hydrogen-based power could radically reduce the cost of power based on renewables. A few Indian conglomerates are also investing in renewable power and these technologies. However, the commercialization of these technologies at scale is still a work in progress. The CEEW report has also explored the implications of a number of alternative net zero scenarios. Whichever scenario plays out, it is quite clear that emissions will be rising for the next 30 to 50 years. A two-pronged strategy of accelerating renewable power generation and radically changing the composition of the fossil fuel basket in favor of gas could significantly reduce that period of transition. Carbon dioxide and other emissions from gas are only a small fraction of emissions from oil and especially coal. Global gas supplies have grown dramatically following the shale revolution driven by hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling technologies. International Energy Agency projections indicate that gas will overtake coal as the second largest energy source after oil within this decade. Despite these developments, the share of gas in primary energy supply and power generation has been stuck at only 5 to 6% in India. The country is ranked 29th in global production at a little over 1 million mmcf per year and 14th in global consumption at around 2 trillion mmcf per year. Now, why has the shale gas revolution passed India by? Australia may soon displace Qatar as the largest liquified natural gas, that is LNG exporter, and may itself be replaced by the US in the future thanks to the shale revolution. US suppliers are also undermining the rigid traditional long-term gas contracts with flexible market-based contracts. This diversification of supply sources and the emergence of active spot and future markets are transforming the global gas market. Two recent technological developments enabling liquefaction and regasification of LNG on board ships will further disrupt the market and reduce costs. India therefore has great opportunity to exploit these developments and strike excellent gas import deals. That's it for this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. To join KSG India courses and to crack the ICE exam, visit ksgindia.com. You can also get a PDF of this podcast on ksgindia.com.